our best way to get our message across is from the franchisees, from the owners, because big is not necessarily good. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about some of those trends that we're seeing. And we're kind of big, but also small, right? So we're big brands that people know and trust. And that's really important because, trust in who's delivering the message is really key in, building influence. And we'll talk about that. But the deliverer of that message, the franchise owner who has invested their life savings, maybe it's become a family business that they're going to pass down to their kids. Right? That's a really powerful delivery tool that we have in lots of industries beyond just restaurants. So we have hotel owners, we have retailers, business to business services, realtors are franchisees, home services, the person that maybe, mowing your lawn or doing a mosquito spray here in the summer, right? That's likely a franchise owner who lives and employs people in your community, supports local charities. So there's, as I said earlier, 800,000 of those in the US, supporting 9 million jobs, and it's 3.5% of GDP. So we've got some great strengths in terms of economic footprint, and that's why we matter. But I think even more powerful is the local community impact and the ability to connect those individuals in those communities with lawmakers or members of the media or others that we're trying to build influence with.
Welcome to another episode of Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop, co-founder of Social Driver. Let's face it, Washington is the center of influence in the US and arguably in the world. Chief Influencer features leaders who have figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and fast-changing environment. Social Driver teamed up with the Communications Board and the George Washington University College of Professional Studies to recognize these incredible leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. I am thrilled to introduce today's guest, Matthew Haller, President and CEO of the International Franchise Association, the leading organization representing the franchise industry worldwide. Now, before we dive in, here are a few things that I think you should know about Matt. Number one, a trusted leader within the IFA for over a decade, Matt rose through the ranks in roles spanning public affairs and government relations before becoming president and CEO in 2021. And his deep understanding of franchising has made him a key connector among franchisors, franchisees, and suppliers. Number two, Matt has helped fuel IFA's growth and public voice, driving annual double-digit revenue increases and launching the Open for Opportunity campaign, which is a national storytelling effort that highlighted how franchising empowers communities across the country. And number three, Matt is a fierce advocate for the franchise business model. Whether representing small business owners in the Wall Street Journal or face-to-face with policymakers, he's defended the franchise business model in Washington against challenges like joint employer regulations, and he's helped secure federal COVID relief for franchise businesses when they needed it most. Matt, you have been called many things: a leading voice for entrepreneurs, a tireless advocate for economic opportunity, and a Global Franchise Awards Hall of Fame member, which is pretty cool. Today, we are thrilled to call you a chief influencer. Welcome.
Thank you, Anthony. It's great to be here.
Well, I was really excited learning more about you and your background. And just to start out, I want to make sure I know what a franchise is, because my grandpa and his brother owned a Phillips 66 filling station, as they were once called, for nearly 4 decades. They retired in the mid-'80s. And then my brother and sister-in-law owned a Baskin-Robbins ice cream shop, which is dangerous because I really love ice cream. So I'm wondering, are these the types of franchises that your organization, IFA, represents?
Yeah, there are a lot of different types of franchises. We represent the latter, the business format franchise businesses like Baskin-Robbins or Dunkin' Donuts. The founder of Dunkin' Brands actually founded the IFA. And so our members are those doing business as business format franchisees. And offering the sale of a franchise to somebody in that category. There's lots of other types, whether it's product distribution, that could be like a John Deere tractor, or a filling station like your grandpa, or car dealerships. Those are not the franchises that we represent. We have 300 different industries use business format franchising, and we have about 1,200 brands that are members of the IFA. And the industry that we represent makes up about 3.5% of the private sector's GDP, supports almost 9 million jobs here in the US. and over 800,000 total locations in business format franchising. So it's a big swath of the economy. There's more franchising than just us, but that's who we are.
So maybe you could say a little bit more about business format franchising. And obviously, you're an advocate for it. So what do people need to know about that type of franchising compared to the others?
Well, in business format franchising, you're buying a playbook to, go into business, we like to say, for yourself, but not by yourself. And the franchisor is really giving you a brand and a playbook to, run and execute the business with marketing support, operational support, in many cases, a built-in customer base, sometimes technology and things like that. But you're not in most business format franchising cases buying, one single product from a manufacturer like you are in a, car dealership type situation, right? So there's some similarities to those product distribution franchises, but with business format franchising, there's quite a range. I would argue more flexibility for the franchisee than a product distribution type franchise. But there's lots of similarities too.
Yeah, when you talk about the playbook, that resonates because I actually worked a little bit at that Baskin Robbins on a couple of visits out to see my family, and they had a lot of like really detailed instructions. And I remember when you were getting trained, you'd weigh the scoop of ice cream to sort of get the feel for how big a scoop of ice cream is supposed to be. And so it's kind of like not just selling that ice cream, but really learning the business model of how to make sure you're doing it in a way that you're gonna make money because you can really
You
load up
can
those scoops and,
oversell,
and give
right?
away too much.
Overscoop. Yeah, you overscoop and you're giving away your margin, right? And so that's likely a brand standard that Baskin Robbins has had and perfected over, thousands of locations to say to the franchisees, hey, this is the way that we understand this business needs to be run as the brand that's kind of perfected that over time. And, generally speaking, especially with an established brand like a Baskin, if you follow that playbook, you're going to be successful. Now, life events happen and things happen in franchising. We can get into that in the conversation that may set, a particular brand or a particular franchisee off course. But generally speaking, established brands, you follow that brand standard and that playbook, and you're going to be more successful than if Anthony decides to open up, his single shingle ice cream
Yeah.
scoop shop. And that's a great thing about franchising. It doesn't work for everybody. It's not for everybody. The right, we like to say sometimes, we're not creating lots of Steve Jobs out there in franchising or Elon Musk. Those are different types of entrepreneurs and inventors. But for the right person that wants to give up some elements of control, but kind of create shared success, it can be an incredible way to go into business, like we say, for yourself, but not by yourself.
Yeah, love that. Yeah, and of course, as a customer, I hope they're a little loose on the brand standards when I go get ice
Course.
cream because I want the bigger scoop.
You get a lot of
Um,
samples.
yeah, exactly. So I guess whether you're talking to policymakers or to franchise owners, or I guess even potential franchise owners, you want them to know that the franchise business model is a really important part of the economy. Um, how important is it? How big is it? And also, I'm just curious, how do you tailor that message for each audience? Because what resonates with somebody who might want to start a small business might not resonate the same as the message you're trying to get across to somebody who's regulating businesses.
Yeah, we have a built-in advantage in franchising. We're everywhere, right? So we're in every single state, every congressional district. Particular built-in advantage right now. We have a president who's pretty interested in McDonald's and some of the other quick service restaurant brands. But I think our best way to get our message across is from the franchisees, from the owners, because big is not necessarily good. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about some of those trends that we're seeing. And we're kind of big, but also small, right? So we're big brands that people know and trust. And that's really important because, trust in who's delivering the message is really key in, building influence. And we'll talk about that. But the deliverer of that message, the franchise owner who has invested their life savings, maybe it's become a family business that they're going to pass down to their kids. That's a really powerful delivery tool that we have in lots of industries beyond just restaurants. So we have hotel owners, we have retailers, business to business services, realtors are franchisees. home services, the person that maybe, mowing your lawn or doing a mosquito spray here in the summer, right? That's likely a franchise owner who lives and works, lives and employs people in your community, supports local charities. So there's, as I said earlier, 800,000 of those in the US, supporting 9 million jobs, and it's 3.5% of GDP. So we've got some great strengths in terms of economic footprint, and that's why we matter. But I think even more powerful is the local community impact, and the ability to connect those individuals in those communities with lawmakers or members of the media or others that we're trying to build influence with.
How much of that advantage is sometimes a challenge? And what I mean by that is the advantage of having a brand and having a playbook for somebody who starts a business is great, right? Because if I see it, Baskin Robbins, it's a familiar brand. I know what I'm going to get. But at the same time, consumers can look at that and not associate it with small business because it's a brand that everybody knows. So, the advantage of having people in every congressional district and all over the place, and the ability for them to have that playbook in a business model franchise or business format franchise, is really powerful. But then I just wonder, where can that be a disadvantage, and how do you adapt your strategy to overcome that?
Yeah, it is definitely one of our biggest challenges in franchising, but you have to always be telling your story, right? And I think that's something that we've leaned into a lot more at IFA over the last decade, and increasingly coming out of COVID with some of the regulatory challenges that we've had more recently, is getting that message out, because everybody is jammed for information clutter, and we want to be driving understanding of who our business model is, that we're sort of breaking down this misperception that there's a difference between the Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks, but it may not be, obvious to you, the customer, because you're just looking, for your coffee or your donut. And, communicating that every time you shop at a Dunkin' Donuts, you are supporting a local business, and 95% of that money is staying in that community. Whereas if you're supporting Starbucks, right, it's another great company, but that's a mega corporation. And so that's different than, patronizing a Dunkin' Donuts. It's also different to some degree than patronizing, Anthony's coffee shop, who is seemingly more, independent and local. But in reality, franchising has that built-in, brand, customer experience. You know what you're going to get. Oftentimes, the experience is more seamless. You have technology advantages, which customers are looking for right now with an app or mobile delivery. And so there are things that are great strengths, and it's all about getting our message out and telling our story. And again, back to my earlier point, using the franchisees and these trusted people in the communities who own and operate these businesses to get that message out on our behalf.
Yeah. I came across something that you said. I think it was right around the time that you were named CEO. So this is probably, 4 or 5 years ago. And it was about listening and accessibility. And specifically, the part that I saw, you said you can get stuck if you create a bubble around yourself and don't have a full appreciation for the needs of the communities who you represent. And that's not a trap I want to fall into. And I wonder if you can, now that, I think you said that a few years ago, what are some of the things you've learned about how you make sure you're accessible to such a huge range of stakeholders? Because like you said, hundreds of thousands of those businesses out there. So you have a pretty big constituency. And how do you set things up so that you can listen to their needs and learn from them and adapt, particularly in times that the political environment's changing, and your survey from 4 years ago of members is not necessarily, the most current in an association world. We got to keep things up to date. So I'd love to hear, how did you not fall into that trap you said that you don't want to fall into?
It's really just being out in the community that I represent and not being stuck in the DC bubble. So while I do spend, about half my time in Washington, the rest of it is traveling, and whether it's speaking at, member events, or, just visiting one-on-one with CEOs of our franchisor brands, or, visiting franchisees in their businesses. And that's part of what that Open for Opportunity campaign was all about, is kind of taking the old Washington fly-in model and reverse engineering it from, inside the communities, and, bringing lawmakers, directly face to face with franchisees and franchisors and suppliers, as we call them, in the districts. So, really just being in touch, not just, sitting in Washington and assuming you know best, really getting on the ground. And I think I learned a lot from really great franchise leaders who have been, mentors of mine in my journey at IFA over 13 years now, moving up through the ranks to become, have the privilege of becoming CEO in 2021. And they use a couple of them use what's called soft power with their franchisees. You can't. So let me go back to the Starbucks example versus Dunkin'. In a franchise, a successful franchise, you can't just make a top down decision and jam it through with your franchisees. If you want to change something that you think is the right thing to do, you have to build support within the system amongst the franchisees and demonstrate sometimes with your own skin in the game, right? So with capital that the brand is investing to show franchisees how this is ultimately going to help them on their bottom line because you need their support. And so using that type of influence, I think is something that I've seen done very effectively by franchise
Hmm.
leaders. And I think when I've wanted to make change at IFA, it's not like I'm sitting in my ivory tower in DC, just, cooking up some new idea, maybe socializing with my internal team. It's building that support across the industry. And it is a very diverse industry, lots of different industries. We don't even use industry in franchising. It's a franchise model that's used by different industries. So building that support across the different sectors of the community, and then in the membership at the franchise brand and the franchisee and supplier level, and that takes a lot of political capital sometimes to do.
Yeah.
But I've been successful, building a team that has that mindset of this is not just something we're going to do because we think it's the right thing to do. We're going to make it a lot of times the industries, the members' ideas, and then implement.
I love that sort of connection that you made, that in the world of franchises, it's more bottom up than top down in a way because they have to get the buy-in from the franchisees. And I guess I'm curious, is there any it occurs to me that maybe that would be a more successful way to even meet customers where they are because it forces you to get that input from all across your franchise model. And I don't know, is there any research around that about how getting that sort of bottom up approach helps franchises become successful? Because obviously it's a growing business model. Your association is growing, and the type of franchise that you represent is growing. And so I'm kind of wondering if that's part of the secret to the success.
Yeah, I think a lot of times you would see ideas or new innovations from franchise companies. Let's use McDonald's as an example. Some of the most unique products, breakfast as an example, was something that came from franchisees, right? Um, those are the types of things that I think the good franchise brands are listening to
Hmm.
the franchise owner who's in touch with the customer at the local level and sees a market opportunity for a brand and themselves to gain market share, and they work through a
Yeah.
process together to innovate, whether it's new product or it's new technology or what it might be. And again, it's one of the reasons why franchising is not for everybody, but it is a very democratic way of know, creating of wealth creation, of
Hmm.
decision making, and it's very uniquely American in this, and
Hmm.
something that we have exported outside the U.S. with tremendous success to other countries. And I think that's something that's really special about this business model is just the way, in most cases, the decisions get made, and you have this sort of shared success. But it doesn't work for more of like an authoritarian type figure.
Yeah. Yeah. Has to be more, yeah, democratic, like
Yeah.
you said, kind of a uniquely American model. I never thought about that. I want to go back to something you mentioned quickly that I think is very interesting. And those listeners that we have that are kind of in the Washington world, they know what a fly-in is, right? The idea that, whoever you represent nurses or you represent teachers or whatever, you fly a bunch of people into Washington, they walk around the halls of Congress and, they show up in force, and it makes an impact. And so many different associations and constituencies do that. But you talked about your campaign sort of as a reverse fly-in. And I wonder if you could just share a bit more about that and how you got that to work, and sort of what impact you saw from it, because it occurs to me that leaders in a variety of industries that maybe do the fly-in model, whether it's they're bringing people to Washington or somewhere else, may not have done the reverse, and they might be able to learn from your success with that campaign.
Yeah, we do still do our in DC fly-in. We bring, anywhere from
Sure.
400 to 500 people in every September, but it's one day or, 2 days, a day at a
Mhm.
hotel and then a day up on Capitol Hill. And of course, we have a team of lobbyists in DC that are, you know, up on the Hill every single day doing their job. But it's kind of an inefficient way to, engage your industry on an ongoing basis. And I think if you look at research, you talk to Capitol Hill staffers, there's very little influence happening from kind of the traditional, letter writing campaigns and even social media campaigns. I mean, we still do all those things at IFA, but the most effective way of getting your message across, aside from, impacting change through the electoral process, is building personal relationships, back home. And, we have those assets. And it was a tremendous opportunity for us to go deeper in engaging our industry, our membership, using it as a tool that our membership team saw as a development strategy for, brands or franchisees or suppliers that were in, a state. Hey, we're doing this in, Atlanta, and we've got the mayor coming and we've got members of Congress coming, and we're having a roundtable conversation at a corporate headquarters to talk about franchising, to highlight brands. So it's kind of free PR. And we would live stream these roundtables so they would get the message out not only to our full membership, but then we could take little segments of the conversation. And you've got a lawmaker saying, I think franchising is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And they're on record and they're on video. And we invite reporters to that, or we use it in, other components of our advocacy and influence strategy. So it became something that was great for building influence, creating relationships, developing, new membership in the association, and getting our message out to the public about franchising. So it checked a lot of boxes for us. We've done them in 20 or so cities over the last
Wow.
3 years. It's not an insignificant investment to do it right, because we're not a federation. So we don't have like an Atlanta or a Georgia franchise association. So we would have to build, kind of a team and create what I'd call like an anchor tenant for an event to host something in a community. But again, once we started doing it, we kind of perfected the model. We had hand raisers across the country asking, "Hey, can we host one of these things?" And it's been really great.
You mentioned you've done about 20. It occurs to me that, at number 20, you're probably doing things a little differently. You probably learned a lot along the way from number 1. Any lessons or takeaways for folks that are thinking about maybe trying to do something like that? What you learned, by the time you got to number 20?
I mean, the hardest thing is lining up your busy members' schedules with the schedules of the members of Congress. Obviously, they're generally in Washington, except for, the recess periods and weekends. So, recognizing we aren't going to be able to do these things on like Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, right? We need to, figure out, like, Friday morning was kind of the sweet spot for us to do one of these events. And that took a little time to perfect it, because we had some times where we'd have, lawmakers, commit and then, back out. That was something I think we early on were doing these as multi-day affairs, and you start to get, I think, diminishing returns. So we really started focusing on, doing one big event at one brand, and then visiting individual franchise locations to do content capture over the course of the rest of that day, and use that in different advocacy campaigns. Those would be two pieces that, we didn't have to put together a full conference to make something a success. Having, 10 to 20 people around a table with multiple lawmakers and a member of the press is a pretty big win.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good point, because sometimes people think you have to have some giant event with hundreds of people, but having something meaningful with a small group. I chair the National Digital Roundtable, and most of our events are about 20 people, and we get great engagement and just very high feedback in the surveys, because folks say they don't often get invited to things that are that intimate, and that they find that, they like it more than going to some giant conference. And so I think that's a really good reminder, is that sometimes a small quality gathering like that can really impact, really it's a better kind of ground for influence, I guess, is what I maybe am hearing you say.
Yeah, and not a lot of our franchise, particularly franchisees, are accustomed to advocacy and influence and talking about themselves. I mean, we sort of do this for a living in Washington,
Yeah.
but getting them comfortable with getting uncomfortable about talking about their business, about their success, and then tying it to a policy issue that we're asking a member of Congress or a local official, to support or
Mhm.
oppose is something that they may be uncomfortable doing in a larger group setting, but doing it in a group of 10
Right.
to 20, I think you're right, is much more appealing to most people.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm also imagining you probably I'm picturing Dunkin' Donuts in the room or other, you have the food and drink from your members among other things, so you can, make it a great event with
We would
that
use a
as
lot of
well.
product placement and we'd have, casual, lunch or breakfast or something before, after.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, there's been times where these local elected leaders are like hanging out for multiple hours even after things end because they want to go do the kitchen tour and learn
nice.
how, something was created, or, do a ride along in a truck because we have a lot of mobile service sector franchises. So, yeah, it's been a cool way to engage lawmakers and our members in a meaningful way.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. That's awesome. Well, bringing it back to Washington for a minute. So, I mean, you've been working in Washington since before the advent of social media or even YouTube. And I'm not saying that to age you because you started very young as a legislative intern, but this has been your career. And I'm just wondering, what are the most effective ways that you've found for an organization like yours to get your message out? You've talked obviously about going across the country through this campaign and the power of your members. But I just want to hear any other advice you have about what influence looks like in today's world.
Yeah, we do. We were pretty omni-channel today. We were not that way in 2020 during COVID, and in a bit of necessity, we started to become more omni-channel because we had to make a number of organizational changes with staff reductions and things like that, like a lot of organizations did during COVID, and that led to us having a pretty lean internal communications and marketing team. And sort of by necessity, we started communicating with just list building and personal email outreach, but also with LinkedIn. And what I found is LinkedIn is a platform for getting updates or taking credit for something in a way where members can kind of consume that where they are versus force us pushing information at them through email marketing. I found to be really an effective way of getting our message out. And then as we've started building a more robust communication and marketing team, the messenger matters. Back to the point of what we were talking about in terms of advocacy with Capitol Hill or with the media and having franchisees as the voices. Not having every email communication simply just come from the IFA, having it come from me
Yeah.
on occasion, from our chief advocacy officer or our chief operations officer or our general counsel. Like we just had an issue around the Small Business Administration and a big change, and we're announcing a webinar that we were going to host with an SBA official. That email came from Sarah, who is our general counsel, and just a much more personal approach. While it is done through our email marketing platform, it's just subtle tweak that we found to be pretty effective in increasing open rates and engagement rates amongst our membership. So lots of different places where we're communicating and really just having the conversation. We have a once a week communications and marketing strategy meeting that's 30 minutes, and we're just making sure that we're doing the right things on the right platforms and with the right frequency, and then measuring it with data. So we're tracking, and these things for large organizations, they're probably pretty basic, but trade associations, I think, oftentimes are pretty antiquated in how they utilize or think about change. And we've been, I think, forward leaning about investing in technology, using data to drive our decision making, getting creative in omnichannel communications and marketing for revenue generating things, value, and government relations. And it's been a big success.
Yeah, I mean, the email example you gave, I just want to sort of double click on that because I think it's huge. recently somebody I know who's an expert in that field said, the from line is way more important than the subject line nowadays in emails. And I think that's right. And having Sarah, your general counsel, be the from line on something, is a powerful way to send a different signal and get folks excited about, some resources that you're providing, about the SBA change. And so the faces are the new logos is something that I say a lot and we say a lot. And I think that you're hitting on that. You've talked about that at different levels, from your members to your team to your own presence on LinkedIn. I want you just to maybe say a little bit more about your members, something that I know you've said before, that your members are really the influencers in their own communities. And you highlighted that through the campaign you've done in 20 cities so far. Um, Talk about your approach to um, get those authentic stories out into the world, and also, from people who just may not immediately be comfortable or think that that's something that that people even want to hear them. I know you've talked about mindset shifts kind of being really important in that way, and I wonder if you could say a little bit more about how you've done that and gotten your members to be those messengers, to be those storytellers, to be those influencers, or I guess embrace that role of influencer in their local communities.
Well, thanks for that. I started with using research from Gallup and from Pew from a couple of years ago that looked at trust in institutions that have continued to plummet. Right, so whether it's the media or government or big business and corporations, trust in those institutions is at record lows. Whereas trust in small business is at record highs. So small businesses are the most trusted institutions in America. And so we have 800,000 of them in franchising. So sort of starting there and then saying to, our audiences, whether it's me speaking on a stage in front of, a couple thousand people or, in my board meetings or smaller settings, right? It's you are the person that the lawmaker wants to hear from, not Matt Haller or Mike Lehman or, people that work for the association. We will help you craft the message that makes the most sense and find the messenger that makes the most sense for that lawmaker, kind of a micro targeting. If the lawmaker, happens to be a veteran, we're going to, try to find a veteran franchisee. And the good news is we have 14% of franchises owned by veterans compared to 7% of non-franchise businesses. So we have a lot of veteran franchisees and a lot of brands that incentivize and specifically look for veteran franchisees. So that's just one example of how we try to micro target the messenger to the audience and use our built-in advantages that we have in franchising to kind of meet the moment that we're in, where everyone's looking for trusted messengers, and we have them, but helping people feel comfortable, sharing their story. And it's not like they have to also be the policy expert. We'll be the policy expert. It's like just go in there and tell your story, and you're living and breathing this every day in your business, in your community, and talk about your employees. And once we get them to start saying yes, they generally start to drink the Kool-Aid and they're like, all right, give me more of that, because it's a bit of an adrenaline kick.
Yeah. Well, what I love about kind of that message that you're sharing there is that, you're taking this Gallup research and what from your career in influence and saying, look, this is something that we have to get these messengers at the local level, but you have to influence them to realize the power they have and to realize that they are the trusted messengers, and then to really, encourage and cajole them to do that. And you've done it really well. Some organizations really struggle to get their members to be messengers in that way. But you've done it, digitally, but also, through these events that you described in person. And so you're connecting the dots there. And I think that's a really powerful message for others that realize they have an untapped asset. They have energy that's sort of latent that they could tap into. And one of the ways to do that, it sounds like that you've really figured out how to do it very well.
Yeah. And I would say I'm a big fan of Rahm Emanuel's famous quote about never letting a crisis go to waste. And we've had some pretty significant issues impact our business model over the time that I've been here. So, I don't sort of wish, painful policy issues or crises on my members. But using these as motivators and helping them see why engagement is important, because you want to sort of help everybody see the shared, or feel that shared
Yeah.
success at the end of this, and show them the strategy that they play, a small part of,
Yeah.
because we're dealing with 535 lawmakers in Congress, and a White
Hmm.
House that has a lot of priorities. And the other thing that I always talk about when we're talking about advocacy, especially at the federal level, is particularly when you come to Washington and you do one of these fly-ins. I mean, these members and the staffers' days are broken into 15-minute increments, right? And it's industry group after industry group after industry group. And, if you can't make yourself memorable and establish a connection while also making clear what your ask is, then you're missing the boat. And we have that time in Washington, but also the time back home where, as I said earlier, they will spend a significantly more larger amount of time with you back in the state or the
Yeah.
district. So, just creating that always on kind of mindset amongst our membership has been something that I've been very focused on.
You mentioned the veterans who are franchise owners that over samples, and as you know, we recently featured Steve Schwab, CEO of the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, on Chief Influencer, and I know you know one another and have collaborated. So I'd be remiss if I did not give you a chance to just say more about that initiative.
Yeah, so it's our longest standing program in our foundation, which is our 501(c)(3), and it's a program called VetFran. It was established after the first Gulf War as a way to help transitioning members of the military determine, what their next step in their career would be. And the leader of the IFA's board of directors at the time also served in the military and knew that there were very similar skill sets to following a playbook in military to following a playbook in a franchise business. And so he challenged the industry to create some financial incentives for veterans who were transitioning, and created this program called VetFran. And so brands create a discount off of their initial franchise fee, and that fee can be typically up to $50,000. And one of the other challenges that veterans face is access to capital. And so that has been a very successful program. I think more than 600 brands of the ISA are, have their largest available discount is available for veterans. We've done research over the years. As I mentioned earlier, 14% of franchise owners are veterans, compared with 7% of non-franchise small businesses. So the number of veteran franchisees continues to grow. And that program, we have partnerships with lots of military and veteran organizations, and it's a good for business, and it's a good cause. And I think those are the best types of programs that
Yeah.
foundations have out there.
Yeah, I love learning about that because, as I said earlier, my grandpa and his brother owned that filling station. I know a different type of franchise model, but still a franchise. And his career was what he did not find the right career path before serving in World War II. And when he and his brother both returned from war, they found what was a really great career path for them and their family. So but I didn't know about that over sampling, like you described, 14 versus 7%.
Yeah,
So,
they love the
that's
systems and the
cool.
structures and the camaraderie that
Mhm.
is built into a franchise model.
So can you say a little bit more about just kind of your approach as a leader inside the organization? Because I know you've held many of the roles inside IFA at some point in your career. And I just wonder how that, affects how you show up as a leader inside the organization.
Yeah, I mean, I try to hire a great team and stay the hell out of the way. I think I learned that from Tom Donahue, who I had the privilege of working for as a personal aide during a period of my time at the U.S. Chamber when he was CEO. And I think also, always follow up. It seems simple. It's actually something that my current board chair is really fixated on as well, because she leads an organization called BNI, which is the world's largest networking organization, and it's a franchise system and helps businesses get referrals from one another. So those are two of my biggest principles. Hire good people, trying to get the hell out of the way, and always follow up. In responsiveness, especially in a service minded organization, is
Yeah.
is really really important to me, both internally and with our members. We've built a great team at the IFA. Part of the strategy on communications and marketing is making sure that you're putting them in lights and getting them out there, whether it's speaking or in front of our members with some of the email communications we talked about. I do consider myself, since I'm still, pretty active. I'm not an inactive CEO in terms of the different areas of the organization that I'm involved in. So maybe a little bit more of a player coach than maybe the old school trade association leader where you're sitting in an ivory tower corner office and not
Yeah.
engaging. I think that's not my style. I would be pretty damn bored if I was doing that anyway. But I think that's also what volunteer boards are looking for, are making sure they're getting the most out of every individual in that organization. And our members run really lean businesses, so they want to make sure, particularly, that the person they're paying the most money to is investing in the time, building a team, and focused on the things that matter most. And being in a CEO role, it's a different job than being in the head of government relations, which is what the role that I had before. So while I do still, go to the Hill or, lobby on occasion, it's not where I spend the majority of my time. The majority of my time is, with the team, with our members, and then thinking about what's coming in the future and how can we always, be thinking about growth.
Yeah.
We have started running the organization a lot more like a business. We hired a chief revenue officer who's now my chief operating officer. And a lot of our growth has come from her and thinking about, with me, like, who are partners that can help us scale.
Hmm.
And that's led to some acquisitions that we've made in terms of growing the organization through, buying or partnering with an organization, ultimately led to an acquisition that will add about another 20 or so employees to the association, and a new
Yeah.
platform for us to get our message out with publishing, with events, and revenue to the organization that can be used to hopefully continue to increase our influence.
Yeah, and say I was going to ask you about that, so I'm glad you brought up the acquisition as part of your growth strategy, and love to just hear what more you can say about that, because not every organization is willing to take that leap to do something like that. And obviously, like you said, you're out with your members, you're getting a sense of where things are going and what the future is, and you decided to make an acquisition to support that. So say a little bit more about it.
Yeah. So the organization that we're partnering and ultimately rolling in under the nonprofit is called Franchise Update Media. And they've been a long time, actually one of the oldest supplier members of the IFA. They've been around over 40 years, and they do a couple of things. About 80% of their business is in the event space, and 20% is content and publishing. So they have both digital and print publications. But really, their signature program is around engaging multi-unit franchisees. And that's probably the biggest growing area of the franchise sector, are people who own and operate multiple locations, in many cases, multiple brands. We call them MUMBOs, multi-unit, multi-brand owners. And they bring this group together, over 1,000 multi-unit franchisees, to an event in Las Vegas every year. And IFA has always had kind of its eyes on this, building something in that area. And our board has tasked me with, thinking about our franchisee engagement strategy, and, finding a partner organization that has similar goals in mind, and supporting what we call responsible franchising, and helping create, content and education for the community. Our events have traditionally been more franchisor oriented at
Mhm.
the IFA. So this is a way to kind of scale that strategy much quicker than trying to build it and compete ourselves. And fortunately, we'd been in a joint venture situation with this company for a couple of years. And, the founders and owners of that company, we had a lot of shared interests, and that led to them initiating a conversation a little over a year ago about if IFA would be in a financial position to even do this. And fortunately, we were. And fortunately, we had the right leaders on our board at the time who looked at it like they would any, for-profit transaction, if they were looking at acquiring a business themselves, which they do every single day,
Yeah.
not just through value accretion, although that was also very important, but not kind of the first question that we were looking at. So that led to this deal, which will close July 1. And we're very excited about what this will do for scaling the value IFA creates, engaging the franchisee community, and as I said, building more influence for the association and the industry long term.
Congratulations. That must be pretty exciting for you and for the whole team to do that. And I can only imagine sort of the synergies that might come from kind of being all under one roof with that other brand that's been around for 40 years, serving a lot of your same folks.
Yeah, it's exciting for IFA. It's exciting for their team as well, because it will create opportunities for them to grow and be part of a bigger organization and within the industry. And I think it's exciting for franchising broadly. So yeah, we're pumped about it.
That's great. Well, as we close, I just want to ask you, as somebody who's been involved with political affairs for years and thinking about influence, what advice do you have for others who are really looking to exert influence in their own spheres, whether that's business or policy or advocacy? But what are some of the pearls of wisdom of influence that you want to share with us as we close out?
Yeah, I think being direct is probably the most important piece of advice I'd give anybody. And then also, of course, building a team is hugely important. You can't do any of these jobs on your own. And then, lastly, I would say it's investing in, like-minded people around you, right? How do you build a team that's coming to work every single day with the same focus, while they may bring different talents and skills and styles? How does everybody know, this is the hill that we're trying to take? And is really motivated. So it's a question I ask, anytime I'm interviewing somebody, and I still meet with every candidate for a position at the IFA is, why do you want to work here? Right? There's lots of organizations, why are you passionate about franchising? Because I think you have to be passionate about something if you're going to build influence around it. And, I've had, jobs in my career where they were good jobs, they were good organizations, but I knew I wasn't passionate about the cause.
Right.
And this is one that I find particularly interesting and passionate about.
I think you're absolutely right. That passion is so important. And it definitely comes through from you talking about the world of franchising and the business that you're building at IFA. And, as I think about just some of the key takeaways from our conversation today, Matt, I think you really have this focus on identifying assets and then cultivating and deploying those assets, because you've talked about how you've done that internally with your own team, right? Like even like an email coming from a certain person. You've talked about how you've done that through your membership and how you've really cultivated their ability to tell stories authentically in person through this campaign where you've had dozens of events across the country, but also in other ways where you're capturing those stories. They're the trusted messengers that folks want to hear from. And then, now you have this new asset that you're acquiring with another organization that's coming under your roof, and how you're able to leverage that. And so figuring out what those assets are, what's the value, how can you cultivate, but then how can you deploy those assets? And of course, so much of that is people and putting people at the center of that strategy. So it was a masterclass in influence. And I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us today. It's a really great addition to this season. And we wish you luck as you continue on and integrate that acquisition into IFA.
Thanks, Anthony. It was a privilege to join you guys, and appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about the association and my journey and our journey at the IFA. And if anybody wants to check out IFA and think about their journey, potentially changing in franchising, check out franchise.org, because you can get all the content and member research that you could ever want about becoming a potential franchise owner. So thanks again for the opportunity.
Franchise.org, a great web domain, not an acronym. I love it. Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or of your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.